T-minus 10, 9, 8.
The clock is operating. We're underway.
Tranquility Base here.
Endeavor, go at throttle up.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
And welcome back to the last part of this very exciting I'm Sitting on Needles here program we have with Mr. Hoagland himself. Now,
Al, that sounds very uncomfortable. I would move off those needles right away.
Well, don't you know about acupuncture? Ask Robin.
Okay. I didn't know it worked on the posterior.
It works everywhere, I've heard.
So how long after we do this do you post?
This show is a priority because we started out with the Secret Space Program series, and we've had some big shots on already, but and we have other series we're doing too. But this is I think half our listeners are mostly interested in this series. And I know many of them have been pining, and so many of them don't even know you, Richard, because you remember podcasters have a different segment than radio people.
Yep.
So I look forward to bringing you to the attention of some new viewers.
Okay. Well, see, this whole thing about social media has evolved so rapidly in the last 3 years. So
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, it's going to be the new order of the day. And do you know Daniel List, dark journalist?
No.
No, he's another out there. I talked with him we had a program recently where we were very critical to the fake Secret Space Program thing, and we discussed you briefly. And if you have time for more podcasters, I recommend the Dark Journalists.
Yeah, sure. Well, see, if it's not on the weekend, the weeks I'm trying to finish this darn book we're working on.
Right.
Which hasn't worked well because there's so much to do. Even 2 days, if you want to get the right guests and you want to structure it so they relate and all this, it's not like radio used to be where you call somebody up and you just kind of chit chat.
It's true. It's changing on so many levels. Good thing you mentioned in your book.
Oh, it has so many gems. That's why it's been delayed.
Okay.
By the way, in this weirdness of social media, this is a whole new territory, and it's basically for me too. I mean, I've been on the web since the web started officially, big bigly, as our president would say, in 1996. Enterprise has been there since the beginning.
Yeah.
But it's the whole fabric has kind of evolved. And the downside for me is, you got like on Facebook, what, 750 million or 1.5 billion, or how many?
Yeah.
How can anybody be a signal in the noise?
Facebook is poor for it's a good place to go to, to give people a place to go, but it's bad to advertise unless you pay. But you're right. You're very right. Even if you were riding the train from the beginning, it's increasing exponentially, I guess you could say. New platforms every day. And I mentioned briefly that YouTube and Google are being taken down these days by a joint concerted effort from the globalist multinational cartels, not just mainstream media, everything from Disney to banks. They all join forces, and they're trying to impose censorship. And it's worked. They're now defunding independent media, and they're trying to bury it. And the end game, and this is my hypothesis, but I think it's very obvious. The end game is that lamestream old media is in panic because I think it was last year for the first time ever, the rate of viewers, listeners has crossed, so that's more people tuning in now to the new media than the old. And of course, the alarm.
I don't understand why they're panicking, because when you look at the web, every individual who has a show or a blog or a podcast, whatever, is a broadcast empire unto themselves.
That's why they're panicking.
Whereas if
they want monopoly.
But hang on. If you're Fox or CBS or CNN or whatever, you aggregate, a million people.
Right.
For one network, as opposed to one podcast, which has what, 1,000?
Yeah, right. Well,
it's like, why are they panicking? Because there's no way you can ever be a signal on the web. At least that's my analysis.
Well, that's not entirely right, but you're right that it's much more competition, it's much more free market. But I'll tell you why. It's an easy analogy to NASA, actually. If the mainstream media was in the business of pleasing people and getting news out, you're right. They would be stupid to do that. But just like NASA, that's not the real agenda. Or maybe it is for the low-level worker, but CIA has influence in most of the mainstream desks. And even so, they're owned by the same multinational cartels. And so it's just about controlling the narrative. Look at Donald Trump. He wouldn't be the president if it wasn't for the new media. So that's a reason to panic, right?
Yep.
So what the end game is that, and this is my hypothesis, is that they're thinking, okay, newspapers die, TV die, radio die. So let that be. And we'll come into this new media and we'll take it over. They're so stupid. What they've started to do now is that they started to try to monopolize YouTube with their channels. And they can talk about, let's say, Syria without getting flagged or buried, but an independent broadcaster can't. But what happens is that people, they're not turning away from mainstream media because of the platform. They're turning away because it's so pretentious and fake. And there's no investigative journalist anymore, as you know. So they come into the new media because, people swear, people are honest, things are just real, right? So that's the problem. So they can't compete. Even if they have YouTube by the balls, excuse my French, then it doesn't help. It just doesn't help. So it's very interesting times we live in, Richard.
Well, I'm trying to keep one foot in radio, which is mainstream, but it's you have a large megaphone.
Yeah.
If you have and we're working on negotiating with a network which is going to give us basically free reign to do whatever I do here ordinarily. And then we're also exploring the social media, the whole digital realm. But the whole digital thing is it's like trying to find a pin in a haystack. It's like, how does anybody aggregate an audience that can make any difference? Because everybody has their own opinion. Everybody has their own voice. Everybody has their own channel.
Yeah.
And when everybody can talk, nobody can hear.
It's a good point, but you will remember it's the beginning. I don't know how it was in the beginning of the radio days. Maybe it was always controlled, but it's a natural kind of organic thing happening here. So what you will see is that people will start cooperating. They will make their own, not media houses, what you call it, networks, partners. I'm already associated with Skeptico, one of the best science shows out there, alternative science shows, and Dark Journalist. And so you will find eventually that there will be lesser segments people will join. Some order will come out of it. But let me just add this. The advantage you have when you go online is that in radio, you're dependent on how many people are tuning in right now. But people are spoiled now. They don't want to... When I was young, we had to run in to watch a television program. They dictated my day, right? Now it's opposite. It's on demand.
Yep.
So when I have, like, say, Joseph Farrell on a popular topic, within a year, we have 100,000 people tuning into it because people do it at their own time. But if this was just live at one point, if it was a big radio show, maybe I'd get 100,000, but I would be dependent on it there and then. And it just increases, and there's more and more links to it, and more people, and it spreads. So it spreads exponentially. It doesn't decline and die off. It just spreads, laying there online, and spreads. So that's the advantage, despite the chaos.
Okay. Well, that's a whole other show.
Yeah. But you were going to tell us something when we're...
Well, I was going to talk about the M drive, but you wanted to talk about the history of Apollo, and the two actually go together.
Okay, cool.
NASA is founded on the idea of rockets. Rockets go back, at least in our modern history, to the Chinese, Wang Hu and those guys. And basically in a rocket, you've got a sealed tube, and you have one end open, the rest of the sides are closed. You light up something that burns at high speed inside the tube. The gases expand. They go out the missing fourth wall. Action and reaction. The rocket casing goes in one direction. The gases go in the other, and that's a rocket.
Boom.
Every rocket you see, every space launch you see on television, whether it's Chinese or Russian or North Korean testing missiles or the Soviet Union or the modern Russians or the European Space Agency or NASA, they're using publicly the same reaction, closed tube rocket technology that was invented 4,000 years ago, according to our current history. No new developments. Now, why are rockets good and why are they bad? Well, one is if you build them big enough, as we've now done, you can do all kinds of amazing things. You can send human beings to the moon. You can send robotic spacecraft to the planets. You can fly by the most distant planet, underscore planet, Pluto. Pluto in my book is still a planet, not anything else. That was a political sidestep that somebody tried to do for weird reasons. I mean, why dethrone Pluto as a planet? There's a story there, but we don't have time right now.
We don't.
Anyway, all of the ways that human beings now are currently using to send vehicles anywhere in the solar system is by means of rockets, action and reaction. Apollo was a super rocket built by von Braun, who was part of the Nazi paperclip group of NASA engineers, Nazi engineers, imported to NASA back in
15,000 people, I've heard, all in all, with families and all. That's amazing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, why? I mean, talent migrates where talent will be rewarded, and they were the guys on the planet that knew how to make things that nobody else could make. So in the Cold War, we got some, the Russians got some, and whatever. And, of course, the Cold War was all a kind of a canard in my book to create the technology to match what the guys out there have. So what's the quickest way to get technological advance? You have a war. Problem is, in a war, you have destruction. Well, how can you have development and creation in the midst of destruction? Answer, you have a Cold War, where everybody feels they're on a war footing, but nothing except a few little things here and there at the edges is destroyed. But the culture is focused on objectives, on deadlines, on progress, on technological development. How many incredible technologies came out of the Cold War race between us and the old Soviet Union?
Yeah, good point.
And I think it was all fostered to get us ready to meet who's really out there, because there probably aren't some nice people out there. and they may or may not be cousins, but that's another show and another day.
Yep.
The point is that with Apollo, NASA built on the technology developed in Germany before World War II, Wernher von Braun and his colleagues, and they brought it to this country in paperclip. They sent them out here to New Mexico, to White Sands Proving Ground, south of me here in the Land of Enchantment. They kept them there on the reservation for like 5 years or something. They then brought them to Huntsville, Alabama. They created a whole space center devoted to von Braun and his colleagues to develop really, really, really big rockets. And so when Kennedy was given the option of going to the moon, lo and behold, the Nazis already had created the technology so he could do it. And that's not really known, that all of that technology that took us to the moon, most of the hard part had already been envisioned and was actually in metal and being tested before Kennedy made the announcement. I was stunned when I found this out, because I thought, president makes an announcement, then engineers follow, right? No. The technology to go to the moon was there before Kennedy aimed us in that direction, which tells me the Nazis knew about structures on the moon, and they wanted them for themselves. When they came over and took over NASA, they basically killed Kennedy. They replaced his hand-picked head of NASA, who was James, what's his name? I'm having a mental... Webb, James Webb, yeah, of course. Webb Telescope is named after him. James Webb was a 33rd degree Mason. And he and Kennedy crafted something called Space Age America. Kennedy envisioned, as part of his new frontier, that NASA would be at the leading edge of the spear to basically bootstrap, to lift without a war all the key technologies that would make life on Earth human. He created, the Peace Corps to basically seed advanced technologies and democratic ideas into all kinds of other countries at the grassroots, helping people live better, cleaning their water, keeping them from dying of disease, giving them ways of building, with different materials than, straw and mud and stuff like that. Anyway, they got rid of Kennedy. Ultimately, Webb resigned in a very bizarre do-si-do back just before Apollo 8 in 1968. Still not explained why he suddenly quit. And then NASA afterwards was occupied, I believe, by a Nazi tier of managers, people who knew what they were doing, and they were the ones that instituted the secrecy into NASA.
But LBJ wasn't even watching, Joseph told me, the landing, even though he had been such a proponent for it. So what did he know?
Well, yeah, because he knew it was a fake.
You're right.
Now, speaking of fakes, let's talk about Apollo 11. Was Apollo 11 real, or was it a fake mission? I am of two minds on this. I can provide data that says Apollo was real. I can also provide data that said that Apollo was done on a studio because they weren't ready yet to go to the moon with Apollo. Eventually, we did get...
And they needed a showcase for the Soviets, right?
And they needed a showcase for everybody, not just the Soviets. I mean, you don't think the Soviet spies knew if we did or did not go?
Right.
But they were in on it. Remember, the world is ruled by an inner class, and the rulers we see are simply puppet masters doing the bidding of the hidden secret class. And it transcends nation states. It transcends history. It transcends race. It's basically a secret world government, which is why it'd be nice to have a kind of a public world government so there'd be some accountability. At least there'd be the pretense of accountability. You'd have someone to go to and...
No, not even they are accountable anymore. So, but that's another story.
That's another program, yeah. So anyway, so von Braun built the NASA program on his V2 rocket technology, because the Saturn V is basically just a big V2, right?
Yeah.
So there has been no real progress in space travel for 5,000 years, right?
Yeah.
Except enter the M drive. NASA, in the last year, has published a peer-reviewed paper, which is the gold standard of real science in our cultures. If it's peer-reviewed and published under appropriate academic credentials, you're supposed to believe it.
Yep. It's sanctioned.
NASA published a sanctioned peer-reviewed paper demonstrating this so-called M drive, which is totally, radically different than rockets.
Oh, I've heard about it after all, yes.
first advance in 5,000 years.
Yep.
The M drive is real. Now, why is this important? Because an M drive can be built by any any hobbyist in his garage or basement. And one of them I know because we funded him through our show, The Other Side of Midnight. I raised several $1,000s to fund a guy to basically build his M drive in his garage.
Wow.
And it worked. So let me explain a bit how it works. With a rocket, you've got to have an open end. You burn gases inside the container, and the open end allows the gases to escape. Action, reaction. The vehicle goes one way, the gases go the other. That's a rocket. In an M drive, you have a cone-shaped microwave antenna, totally sealed, usually made of copper. You pump microwaves into it, and the M drive, like a homesick homing pigeon, wants to move toward the short end of the cone. Now, how do you get action and reaction out of a sealed system, a closed system? The answer is, in current physics, you can't. What the M drive is doing is, through the microwaves, it's tapping into the underlying torsion field. So you're basically pulling yourselves up by your own bootstraps. You're basically climbing on the ether, because the ether is this river of flowing material that the microwaves in the M drive are interacting with, and there's a differential between the front end and the back end, and the ether actually is being pulled through the drive and accelerated through the walls, because it doesn't understand about matter. It's transparent to matter, okay? So it works, and it works going anywhere.
Yeah, but you could then argue that it's the same principle, only you're taking it from another dimension in a way.
Sure.
It's like an interdimensional,
yes.
Same principle as regularly, only added dimension. Yeah.
Right. I'll buy that. The point is, in 3 dimensions, it looks like you're getting something for nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you put 2 M drives on a pole, on a vertical rod, and you have one aimed one way and the other on the other side aimed in the opposite direction, 180 degrees apart, it will cause the rod to spin, to rotate, like an anemometer. You know, like those little things with wind cups that they put out to measure wind speed. Except to think of them as not wind cups, but as M drives. You know, 2 of them, 4 of them, 6 of them, however. You spin that rod. At the base of the rod, you put a generator. You basically can bring in more energy from higher dimensions to run the M drives than you're using to run the M drives. So you have what's called perpetual motion, which means you have infinite electricity out of the ether, which means you can do away with every coal-fired, nuclear-fired, oil-fired power plant in the world, build something the size of a bread box in your basement, and every single house now being threatened with a power outage because Hurricane Irma is bearing down on Florida. If they all had their basement M drive power units, each house would be independently powered, no outside wires, and they would survive. If the structure survived the hurricane, their power would never go out. That's the revolution that we have. Now, here's the real revolution. You take an M drive, you put it in a privately owned spacecraft, either developed by Musk or Bezos or me. I've actually been approached by a private satellite group that want to get together with my M drive guy, and they've raised the money to put a private spacecraft in Earth orbit next year to hunt for UFOs. It's called a CubeSat, and it's supposed to be launched on a conventional rocket, kind of dumped out as part of this Air Force NASA cooperation. And then the private satellite does whatever it wants to do until it re-enters and burns up in a couple, 3 months. They want to put a privately developed M drive in this private satellite. And I'm bringing the 2 groups together. I don't think it's going to happen next year. I think it's going to happen maybe the year after. But if that happens in the next couple of years, you then put that thing in Earth orbit, you turn it on, and like a homesick homing pigeon, it will go wherever you point it. And it will go, and it will go, and it will go, because there's no fuel. All it needs is electricity. You put a couple of solar panels on it, you've got enough electricity from the sun, which means you could send your little M drive spacecraft to the moon. You could send it to Mars. You could send it to Pluto. And because you're accelerating at a constant g, it wouldn't take you 10 years to reach Pluto. It might take you a year.
So basically we're talking your own little space drone here.
Yes. And the key part is anybody who can afford a Porsche or a Mercedes or a Maserati can have their own space program, because that's how much this is going to cost.
Amazing.
Tens of thousands of dollars. And that means you can send automatic drone cameras on M-Drive not rockets, but systems anywhere in the solar system to get close-ups of the alien ruins and structures all over the solar system, totally uncensorable by NASA, by the NSA, by the DoD, by the Chinese, by the Russians, because they get dumped on the internet.
Would this be what Werner von Braun and company had back in the Apollo missions? Would this be the real technology behind the actual moon landing?
Well, I don't know. I am still on the fence whether there was secret anti-gravity technology incorporated in the lunar module. I have some evidence that says yes. I have some evidence that says no. So I remember, I'm an evidence kind of guy. I'm looking at the evidence.
Sure.
I know we could have done it with rockets. I know we could have done it as advertised. It was very dangerous. It was very dicey, and they stopped doing it because they didn't want to kill people. Plus, they also brought home to Earth something that I think they really, really wanted, which is when they landed Apollo 17 at the Apollo 17 landing site, which, by the way, is a whisker away from 19.5 degrees north on the moon. Did you know that? I think they brought back a robotic head of an ancient robot.
Data. Yes, C-3PO or whatever, yeah.
That was flying in that crater, Shorty Crater. I think they retrieved it and brought it home. Now, if in any good robotic model, Asimov et al., this robot was able to store the record of its entire civilization's history in memory, it means if you could somehow figure out how to talk to it, reactivate it, you would have access to a galactic archive,
oh my God. Yeah.
a library of stunning information, cultural, artistic, technological, scientific. Any culture that had that under their purview, under wraps, under their exclusive control, would own not just the Earth, they'd own the damn solar system or this part of the galaxy. That's what Kennedy was willing to give to the Soviets, and that's why I think the Nazis killed him.
Right. Hey, quick interjection. I've shown that picture that you have in your book, Dark Mission. I've shown it to people who have no idea what it's about. They haven't even heard about you. I've said, what is this? Oh, it's obviously a head. It seems like an artificial head. That's what people are saying. That's called a blind test.
Yes. And do they notice the iris eyes?
That I don't think.
Go and look at that picture again, because the eyes of this head on the moon, lying next to other artifacts.
Yes.
They have camera-like iris lenses.
Oh, okay.
They're not human.
Okay.
They basically look like an eye within an eye, which is a camera iris, and it would be a mechanical thing, and it would be activated by light so that your robot would not be blinded, etc., looking at bright lights or looking in dim shadows and all that. And he also had a red stripe under his chin.
That's weird.
Which, to me, if you have a bunch of robots doing all your manual labor, you would basically code them. The red stripes would be, let's say, the farmers, and the blue stripes might be kind of like the red shirts and the blue shirts on the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Each division, each function has a color. This head has a red stripe, which, of course, rocks on the moon do not come with red stripes under their chins. So to me, they were color-coded robots for their service functions as part of the society which created them. And that leads us to Battlestar Galactica, doesn't it?
That's interesting, yes.
Think about the theme behind Battlestar Galactica. Humans create a bunch of robots. The robots revolt.
Yep.
They throw over humans. They attack them. They almost decimate them because they don't want to be chattel and owned anymore. Going back to Isaac Asimov, and when does a robot become a self-sentient, aware being? And if you create them in a certain form, do other entities, other consciousness from other dimensions, do they come and inhabit the robot? So it's really sentience. It's not artificial. It's basically you've created a home for this consciousness to move into.
A new vehicle for the soul. Possibly.
Yes.
Possibly. But
another
Yeah, Clark McClellan, I'm sure you know about him. I think he claimed that they had 2 space programs.
Yep.
I'm not sure.
Unfortunately,
What's your opinion about Clark McClellan?
well, he's a very fragile reed to rest this on because his personal life is a disaster. And it may be by design because he's been so attacked.
They crushed him, no doubt.
Yeah, and you have to look at the credibility of someone like that and ask questions. But if he was the only source, I would say, well, okay, but he's not the only source. And again, the whole NASA program, going back to Kennedy, looking at those Project Corona super secret satellite images taken not of the Soviet Union, but of the moon, that tells you where Kennedy was focused and why he was focused and why he insisted up to his dying day that going to the moon had the highest priority because he knew what it would do to our civilization and the breadbox it would blast us out of. And they killed him before he could begin to democratize it the way he envisioned. Mm-hmm. And that, by the way, gets us back to Donald Trump. Because I think if these files on the Kennedy assassination are released per the legal schedule set in motion by the House Committee on Assassinations back in the 70s, the 50-year end date ends on October 26th of this year, 2017. If Donald Trump does not stand in the door and allows all this to come out, I think we're going to find the real reason that Kennedy was killed had to do with his mission to the moon and nothing to do with the Cuban thing or the CIA thing or the Russian thing or the mob thing.
Well, I don't think those things helped, but of course this would be the biggest concern.
Did you ever see a stunning movie called Murder on the Orient Express?
Oh, yeah, of course. All versions.
Okay. Remember the final outcome?
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that's kind of Joseph's take, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I think. They all had reason to kill him.
Yeah.
But the real reason under which, again, it's like the masquerade. It's like the diversion.
The trigger point.
You want to keep the diversion, the real reason, secret. So you put out all these other reasons that are also equally real, but they're not the ultimate reason, which was Kennedy was going to suddenly democratize the human spirit in ways that would be game-changing and still will be if we can follow the mantra and make everything out there not secret but public.
But do we have many NASA whistleblowers? I know you've cooperated with a certain Ken Johnston.
Right. Well, see, I'm not so much into the whistleblowers because each individual can be blown away.
Yep, that's true.
I'm into the actual cadre of NASA engineers.
But Ken has delivered, hasn't he? Because what many people don't know is that not only is there a suspicion about the Apollo mission's footage, but they even destroyed it.
Well, they did more than that. Because he has a story where he talks about, when Apollo 14 came back, they were taking what's called DAC camera footage, which was basically a gun camera, military Air Force gun camera, modified to take footage out the lunar module window or the command module window during the Apollo missions. They brought this footage back. It had to be developed in a lab, of course, in Houston by a guy named Dick Underwood. He was the head of the photographic lab. And he gives Ken, who was, by the way, part of the Lunar Receiving Laboratory sample request stream to the individual investigators, the scientists who had participated in Apollo. Ken dealt with those, and he gave them film, and he gave them samples of their rocks, photographed close up and all that. He was curatorial duties as a contractor through, I think, Brown and Root to the Lunar Receiving Laboratory there in Houston during Apollo. And one day he was given an order to destroy all copies, extraneous copies of the film under his purview, except for one that NASA would keep in the archive.
Insane.
And something about this young guy, he was my age. He was in the middle of the most extraordinary adventure of his life, right? Marine pilot. Something told him this was not right. So he put a whole bunch of the film in a gunny sack and he sent it to his university, and then he proceeded to destroy the rest. Well, years later, we tried to find that film, and the film had neatly disappeared from the university. So obviously agents were following what he was doing, but he did keep some film to himself in his personal archive, and he carried it with him through move after move after move. Now, Al, I don't know how many times you moved in your life, but every time you move, you lose stuff.
Yeah.
Somehow Ken kept the Apollo footage. So when we met back in the 90s, he was able to give me a pristine 30-year-old unsanitized version of an Apollo 14 image taken by Alan Shepard of Ed Mitchell on the moon. And it was on that unsanitized original copy of the NASA film shot on the moon that I found the first corroboration in the Apollo program of the ancient glass structures on the moon arching over Mitchell, putting up the TV camera on Alan Shepard's photograph.
Yeah, because what many people don't know is that when they sent the pictures from the moon, it wasn't the original footage. It was what you call a projection. Could you briefly explain that?
Well, we're mixing our photographic streams. Remember, there were several sets of imagery coming from the moon.
Yeah.
There was initially the handheld cameras by the astronauts on the surface, taking stills, Hasselblad 70 millimeter stills, black and white in color. There were also these DAC cameras that had 16 millimeter film, black and white in color, mounted on various parts of the spacecraft, including on the rovers, to document some of the rover activities. That was all film, brought back, developed, and then made public. There was also the DAC cameras, the film cameras, the 16 millimeter military aircraft gun cameras, modified, that were shooting through the windows of various parts of the rendezvous and docking and releasing the LEM and all that. Those are public domain. Then, during the actual lunar walks, starting with Apollo 11, there was a TV signal sent live from the moon, an electronic signal with a television camera connected to a transmitter in the lunar module, sent through radio waves back to Earth, picked up by big ground stations on the Earth, sent to Houston, converted there because it was the wrong format. It had to be converted from one scanning system to the NTSC, the FCC mandated 525 line scanning system for American television, or your CCAM system there in Europe. And it was that conversion that was a real problem because NASA originally never imagined they would actually take a TV camera to the moon. Don't you find that bizarre?
That's insane. You do make a point of it in the postscript of the book too.
Yes, it's totally insane. And it was a guy named Stan Labar, I think, at Westinghouse, who bludgeoned and beat until his hands were bloody NASA officials to finally include a black and white camera on the moon mission, the first moon mission.
Even though they did have color.
Oh yeah, they had stunning color. They could have had color. The reason was, of course, they dared not let people see in any high definition what was on the moon live on television because they could have been photographing all those ancient glass structures they didn't want people to see. Okay? So they put us through this convoluted Rube Goldberg process of physically mounting the camera, looking at a TV set, which was converting from scan television to NTSC television and all that arcane stuff. They did it to basically keep secret live what was really there. So what you had that night, which Robert Heinlein watched in that studio, that hangar in Downey, California, live while we're looking at the moon falling into the Pacific Ocean through the open hangar doors, were these ghostly images, the poorest quality television you can imagine in the 20th century.
Anticlimax.
On a nation raised by television, of the two guys cavorting around on the moon, deliberately made bad so that people couldn't pick up if the camera detected the glass structures, which would have been in the background. Now we fast forward the videotape to I forget what anniversary, but NASA wants to do this big deal anniversary, right? So they go and try to find the original videotape they've recorded. So using modern computer technology, they can basically change those ghostly figures with computer enhancement. They could have been as crisp and clear as almost now television. And they can't find the videotape. And they can't find it. And they look high and low, and they look in archives all over the world. And finally they come out with the story, oh, well, we were so desperate for money a few years ago, we mistakenly reused the tape. We taped over it because we couldn't have money for videotape.
Right.
Which, of course, is nuts.
Yeah.
That tape exists in some secret archive, and they dare not let us see it, and they dare not let ordinary Americans with laptops and, Stephen Jobs Mac technology get their hands on it because they will enhance the background glass structures if it's ever allowed to see the light of day. So,
like we've done already with the crumbles they have released.
yes, exactly.
But then stuff pops up in dumpsters and all sorts of insane... what's that about?
Well, remember, no system is foolproof. Even if the order goes out, there'll be people like Ken Johnston who, when they get the order, they'll say, wait a minute, this bothers me. This is not moral. This is not what I signed up. This is not part of my NASA charter, which was to freely make available. I mean, they could have given that excess film if it was excess. Can you imagine having copies of lunar photographs that are defined as excess?
Yeah.
They could have given it to kindergartens, to grade schools, to libraries.
Media, museums, you name it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They could have disseminated far and wide, not ordered him to destroy it, but they wanted it destroyed so no one would ever see it, because that was when the cover-up was in full bloom. Now with the internet, with social media, with more people listening to radio on the internet like this show than are listening to radio on radio, these log jams, these filters, these blocks, these dams are breaking down one by one by one. And ultimately, somewhere, somehow, we're going to get to see the original Apollo 11 videotape footage of the first lunar landing. I swear it dollars to Navy beans, that footage was not destroyed. It exists somewhere, and it's only a matter of time until it comes out.
From your mouth to the heirs of the gods. I know you're pressed for time, Richard.
Yeah, I just want to point everybody again. Well, it all depends what Donald Trump does this coming October, if he's still president.
Yeah, that's another question.
What he does in October, whether he releases all of the files around the Kennedy assassination, which
you know that will be the mother of all October surprises.
Yeah, it will be. So that's the one to stay tuned for and to watch, because that will tell us whether his entire administration is built on lies or on incredible 4D deception, so that he's sidetracking everybody from knowing what he's ultimately going to do before he does it.
We all hope you're right, but I must admit I'm extremely skeptical to all sorts of disclosure, because I've never seen examples of any disclosure. If anything has been disclosed, it's been grudgingly, it's been dragging their feet, it's been they're forced to. They're basically forced to.
Yes.
Are you aware of Richard Dolan's scenario for disclosure, the AD book?
Not really. I've been trying to get Dolan on my show. If you have any good words, put it in, because I want him to come on and talk about
He's
the break.
very hard to get on. I mean, to get hold of, I mean.
Yeah.
That's the problem. But
no, I know that they...
We have had him on, but he... Yeah, sorry, go on.
I know he's written a book about post-disclosure, but I don't really remember how he arrives at when it's going to happen. Because to me, in the ritual model, it has to happen this year. Between now and the end of this year, 2017, by the way, is not 2017. It's really 2012.
Oh.
That's a whole other discussion about calendars and lions and synchronizing calendars. This is 2012.
Okay.
How do I know this? Because the physics we've been measuring with the accutron says this is 2012. So and you can only surf when surf's up, right? If you're a guy surfing, although there's not much surfing in Norway, I guess.
No.
But you can only surf when surf is up. The energetic background physics is the highest.
Yeah, the open window, basically. That's the principle.
Yes. And that's what it has to happen. And both sides, if you can think of good guys and bad guys, both sides are vying for control of human consciousness in this time window. And that could be one of the major wild cards that could tip the balance in favor of an open as opposed to a closed system.
Then they need to control the narrative.
Yes, exactly. So 2017 is the year to look for disclosure. If it's ever going to happen, it has to be sometime between now and the end of the year. And luckily, imagine, the whole Kennedy thing was planned 50 years ago to occur in 2017 in October. Isn't that interesting?
I'm in New York in October.
Yeah.
I hope it will go down well, so I get home.
We will see.
Hey, before we part here, you do have friends in NASA. That's obvious.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not just talking about that you've been invited there and that you know it, but aren't people seeding stuff to you?
Yes. And there were some people a few years ago who seeded me some remarkable 19.5 stuff that went over the heads of all the mainstream press. It all was published mainstream, but I was the only one that got the heads up. And, of course, I know what it means. It's more code. By the way, watch very carefully this whole Tabby star phenomenon. You know about Tabby's star?
No, tell us.
Oh my God! This star was developed. It was in 2009. NASA launched a mission called the Kepler Space Telescope.
Yes.
Right. It was designed to use a CCD camera. Remember these incredible linear cameras that can see very faint things and very bright things on the same plate, on the same electronic recorder.
Mm-hmm.
It was focused at one direction in the Milky Way called the Cygnus Lyra system.
Right.
And it lasted about 4 years before the reaction wheels stuck and they had to change the mission. And now it's been changed in terms of its focus and where it's pointing and all that. But in those 4 years, it recorded one star out of about 200,000 in the direction of Cygnus that has the most baffling, bizarre, amazing, far out, unbelievable light curve you can imagine. The star is a main sequence star, a bit heavier and more massive than the sun. And it's normally normal. It just, shines like a bright F-type star will shine, except suddenly it will undergo incredible eclipses by as much as 20% for like months at a time. And then it will suddenly regain its brightness. And then it will go through lesser eclipses. Well, in the mainstream media, triggered by a paper that was published publicly in 2015, years after the mission ended, when they got citizen scientists involved in going through all the archived Kepler data, they published a paper showing this bizarre, remarkable star called by some the most mysterious star in the universe. And one of the models that was floated again and again in the mainstream, from space.com to the Atlantic to NBC, was there was an alien megastructure built around Tabby's star.
Oh, yeah, I remember. Yes, there was a lot of hype there. Yes, keep on.
But think of it as hype in the mainstream. The mainstream didn't giggle. They didn't laugh.
Nope.
They published a serious, sober analysis that, in fact, Tabby's star could be our first discovered super advanced Type 2 ET civilization.
Of course, because if it's far away enough, then they can, then it's okay.
Only 1,500 light years away, right?
Well, to us, that's so-called unreachable. So, then it's okay.
Yeah. But what we have discovered, and is going to be part of this video and part of the book, is that Tabby's star is exquisitely, intricately, and redundantly mathematically connected to this solar system and specifically to Mars.
Okay, you mean our solar system?
It's part of our solar system. It's part of our hidden history. It's part of the Martian experience. It's part of how we came to be human beings on planet Earth. And isn't it oddly interesting that in 2017, the world has gone nuts over a potential alien civilization living around Tabby's star? We are being prepared.
Wow. Could that be the counter sun that the ancients speak of?
No. This. I think in our model, this is the place where the guys who came here and created what we see around us, including us. That's where they came from.
All right.
And they left us clues so we can know where Daddy and Mommy ultimately live.
Right. As we see in the Masonic lore and yeah.
Exactly. So you're going to see an awful lot more, particularly if the big revelation on Tabby's star comes this year in 2017, which it could well be. In other words, all of the mainstream hype, all the mainstream press, sensitizing, as my intel agents call it. They say you have to have what's called a certain soak time so people get inured with the idea. And then you blast them with new news. The new news is going to be Tabby's star, in fact, is artificial.
Wow. That's one to watch then. But when you say, we talk about NASA, isn't there really two layers in NASA? Because most people would say, hey, how can all these people be in on it? Obviously, they are not all in on it. So how many, is it a question of a segment in NASA knowing, or is it external people who just controls NASA?
No, I think it's three layers. I think there's the external modulation. In other words, NASA gets its orders. The top brass get their orders.
Yeah.
All right. And it's not just the White House. All right.
No, of course. CIA probably. And
there then is a layer that knows they're getting orders.
Right.
And they're willingly going along with it. They're part of the cover-up. They're designing. Then you have the vast majority of engineers and scientists and people that work for NASA Most of them, 99% of them, are completely oblivious.
Yeah.
They're like I was back when I worked for Cronkite. I couldn't imagine there'd been a hidden agenda for NASA then. If you told me, I would have said, "Oh, come on, you're nuts."
Yeah.
But some of those people, a percentage, they have figured it out.
Yep. And they are reading your books.
And well, maybe they are. Maybe they've just figured it out on their own. But what they've done that we have found is they have left clues going back to the Apollo era in the Apollo data, like in the film. Remember I talked about the DAC camera films?
Yeah.
They hid messages for us in the splicings between the films. Coded messages left by NASA people in 1969, 1970, 71, 72 in the films for those that would come after, like me and others, that would be able to look at it and say, "Oh, that's what they meant." So there was this revolutionary group in NASA resisting the Nazis.
Already back then.
Already the resistance inside the agency, desperately unhappy they'd been taken over by the Nazi crowd, but following their Masonic Shemsu Hor tradition to make this public, and they're still there, and they're still doing it. And I have a feeling they have some big surprises in this year, 2017, still to unveil.
Do you think Buzz Aldrin is part of that crowd?
What did Aldrin do when he came back from the moon?
Well, he was sour. He's been cranky ever since.
Oh, very, very, very. But what did he do professionally? He wrote a book.
Oh, okay.
He wrote a novel about an alien civilization discovered on the moon.
No.
Yes.
Buzz Aldrin? Wow.
Yes, it's called Encounter at Tiber.
I didn't know this. My bad.
Google.
Yeah. I believe you.
Google is your friend.
Yeah.
Aldrin either suspected through his mind conditioning, his mind control. And I go into Dark Mission. I go into how all the astronauts had their minds kind of messed with.
Manipulated, yeah.
Manipulated, yeah. Or between those segments when it wears off, and they have to maybe have booster shots because there's evidence that this doesn't take forever, that you can't maintain the block that it actually begins to come through. Like Charlie Duke. Charlie Duke, who was the astronaut with John Young, who jaunted around on the lunar surface in Apollo 16 in the rover. Remember what Charlie Duke said about the dreams he had on the moon? How he was dreaming. He was lying there in the lunar module over that first night before they went out on their second EVA, and he has this dream that they're riding in the rover and they come across tracks, and they follow in his dream the tracks, and they find another rover with two astronauts, obviously long dead, sitting there in their spacesuits with their helmets, their gold helmets down so they can't see the features. And in his dream, he gets off his rover and he walks over across the moon dust a few feet to the other rover, and he lifts up the outer gold covering. And he's looking at himself.
Wow.
And that's in print. Now, is that a fake story so he gets the word out? Remember Elmer Dickinson, tell all the truth, but tell it slant.
Yeah, and we have also, you've elaborated so many times in different shows about Armstrong trying to send out messages.
Oh, yes.
But if anyone find it preposterous that they've been, suggested, not just pressured, but actually manipulated, hypnotized, let me remind you of the debunker Darren Brown. He set out to debunk that hypnosis could attain stuff like this. He was studying Sirhan, who claims that he was not just hypnotized to forget, but to actually murder a president.
Yes.
And you know what Darren Brown found?
No.
That it was possible. The debunker, he was going to debunk it, but he's sincere, right?
Yeah.
So he ended up with the opposite evidence, and it's a popular show out there. Everyone can see it. So he has proven that you can get people to kill, not just, dubious people, but normal, kind people, to assassinate someone, a famous person, and then forget all about it.
Interesting.
It's proven. It's not even up for discussion. So when you suggest that this could have happened to the astronauts, something similar, it goes right along with what we know for a fact is possible.
Well, again, I have data, I have evidence, and I lay it out in Dark Mission. For instance, one of my colleagues in the space covering business, he worked for NBC, I worked obviously for Cronkite and CBS, was Jay Barbary. You have seen Jay Barbary covering every space launch for the last 40 years. Jay Barbary now looks like he might last another 40 years, but he's getting up there,
Yeah.
Anyway, Jay Barbary, a year or two after the Apollo 11 mission, out at Edwards Air Force Base, at I believe a Kiwanis club, which had a hall, he held a little party for Aldrin, and he was doing for NBC a kind of a documentary about Apollo and 2 years now and all that kind of thing. So he has Apollo astronaut Buzz Aldrin on stage. They're sitting in two very easy chairs, big armchairs. They've got a whole bunch of audience out in front of them, Kiwanis Club members, members of the public, whatever. And they're on an Air Force base, Edwards Air Force Base, which is a supreme NASA test facility, used to be Air Force and went to NASA. So they're just having a kind of two buds talking about the space program, right? So Barbary asked him, well, Buzz, what did it feel like to land for the first time on the moon?
Yeah.
And Aldrin sits there. Suddenly, he jumps up, runs off the stage, runs out a side door into an alley next to the Kiwanis Hall, and throws up his lunch all over the alley.
Protection program kicks in.
Now, that is aversion therapy.
Yes, exactly.
So he could not even go close to what it felt, because it was Ed Mitchell who told me and told many other people, and actually wrote it in his book, The Way of the Explorer. He said what bothered him for years was he could remember all the mission details, what they did here, what they did there, the stations, the geology experiments, the picking up rocks and all that. But he couldn't connect what it felt like.
Exactly.
The emotion. Yeah. And he got so disturbed by this that he went to a therapist who I happen to know separately. And I have this story from the therapist, who I'm not going to name names. He goes to this therapist to have this person debrief him with a hypnotic, probe to go past whatever blocks so we can get at what he really felt like to walk on the moon. And the therapist can't get him to go there. He actually demurs, that's not important, and he does everything possible, but he cannot break through the block. So whatever technology was used, I think, is a cut above normal hypnosis.
Okay.
But given that we're dealing with the military-industrial complex, an awful lot of secret nasty experiments, I would imagine that hypnotic with drugs can be pretty damn foolproof, because I know two astronauts now that show all the evidence of post-hypnotic conditioning where they can't even go next to the idea, what did it feel like?
But what about these reports that they saw stuff on the way to the moon? And this was censored.
Well, they did see stuff. They saw the SLA panels, and Aldrin talks about that. Did they actually see alien ET spacecraft pacing them? Probably not. I think all of that.
Even if they did, how could they know it was alien spacecrafts?
Yeah.
All they could know it was something, right? So.
Well, they saw from the command module on Apollo 11. They saw blinking lights following them.
Couldn't that be the secret space program?
It could have been. There's a whole other story I would tell if we had time, which we don't now. I can tell the next time.
Yep.
But yeah, in other words, why would a so-called secret space program show up to where it would be visible to the visible program if you want to keep your astronauts in the dark?
Good point.
That makes no sense.
No.
Why would aliens or ETs show up when it's so primitive that it's not even worth paying attention to? But it makes great disinformation for that segment of the population that's going to believe the woo-woo and therefore delegitimize any really unusual things.
Yeah, that's the name of their game. We know you have to go, so let us wind down. Let's end on this high note. And do you have any more time for Enterprise Mission website these days? You're so busy with your new radio show and everything. Well, but it's being still updated and you're still putting out papers?
Oh, yeah. Well, I haven't. I was thinking of doing a paper on this moon stuff because the amateurs photographing the lunar cities from here. See, the biggest thing that I've been asked all over the years is, well, if there are all these ancient glass cities on the moon, how come we don't see them? And the answer is we have been for centuries. Nobody has known what they look like. They've been misapprehending the corona for the glass structures hugging the moon's surface.
Yeah.
It's only now with sophisticated digital technology that an average person with a handheld camera can take a picture, which when you blow it up in Photoshop, bingo. And I was going to go through in a paper, which I still may do, but I figure now since most people are on the web, and they're looking at videos, I'll do this as a video, and that way we can animate it, show stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'll do a follow-up paper for Enterprise. But the real way to put stuff out there now is to put it into video format.
Seeing is believing, right? So.
Yep. So that's what I'm going to do after I put out the Mars one in the next couple of weeks.
Okay. And we've had, we had a big focus today on your NASA book, but we should mention the other book too, the first one, Monuments of Mars. Isn't that out in a revised edition too?
Oh, yes. It's up in its 6th edition. It's The Monuments of Mars, A City on the Edge of Forever, in either the 5th or 6th edition. Then the next
That's where the whole hula hop began, with the face on Mars. That's how most people got to know you.
Exactly. The analysis of Cydonia,
yep.
The structuring of the face. Cynthia's work is reported in that volume, and the Mark Carlotta's 3D computer stuff, the D&M pyramid, the decoding of the mathematics, the sacred geometry, the beginnings of the NASA ritual, because they do all this stuff now by these secret hyperdimensional keys, particularly 19.5, again and again and again. So finding 19.5 Tabby's star told me that was how we're connected. Just a preview there.
Right. And very important to say, people, if you don't know it yet, Richard has finally become a radio host himself. Now Art Bell.
I was conned into doing this by Art Bell, yes.
No, because we all know the story about your wage with George Norrie, but he never let you on as a host.
Nope.
And now finally you are a host. And it took Art Bell, actually, because he made his own channel. What was this channel called again?
It was actually an internet site called Dark Matter.
Right. But then he jumped off the ship pretty early, didn't he?
Something very strange happened. I don't know why Art retired suddenly in a very dramatic...
For the 10th time.
He was claiming that people were shooting at him, 30-30s, rifles through the walls and all that. So basically he left me the only one left on the runway, and then they asked me to kind of leave. I'm not quite sure why. So we are now independent. We're on shortwave. We're on the internet. We're on AM and FM. We're looking now at network coverage on GCN. We're talking with them, and also on the web.
So your show is called The Other Side of Midnight. I didn't know you could... When you say it's on the web, you mean live. You can't find...
It's live, yeah. No. It's also now being archived. You can find it.
It is?
Oh, yes. It's now being archived.
Tell us.
Well, if you go to Blog Talk,
yeah,
you will find access to the archives there. We just made that deal the other day. And we're on... I forget which podcasting. iTunes, I think, is now going to take it. And you just search up. I did a search the other day on Google on The Other Side of Midnight radio show. 18 million searches for my show. 18, and we're number 2 in TalkStream when we're on.
Yeah.
We would actually probably lead Norrie, except he had 600 affiliates and we had 3.
Right.
So it all depends on TalkStream and how many streams are feeding into the internet. So the fact that we're number 2 when we're on, and he's number 1, and we're basically, giant next David and Goliath.
Well, you're nibbling at his ass, basically. So.
Well, let's not get into personalities, but it's basically Premier. It's basically a corporation.
Yeah.
And the good news is that we are winning the people war against the corporation, and all we need is more affiliates and more people to listen. And I hope your show will help.
Yep, me too. I guess we'll just end it there for now.
Okay.
You have, here in Norway, I don't know if you know, but an oral contract is as law-abiding as a written one. So you can take people to court if they promise something.
Okay.
So you've already said a couple of times you come back. So just remind you of the Norwegian laws, right? So...
I don't need legal reasons to come back.
That's great.
It's a very, very enjoyable afternoon, and we've only scratched the surface because when you're looking at hidden space programs or hidden history or hidden who the human race really is, 2017 is going to be the year. Lots of things that have been hidden. That's what the definition of apocalypse is. It doesn't mean disaster. It means enlightenment.
Revelation.
Yes.
So your book will be out approximately when?
Hopefully by Christmas. We're working very hard.
So I suggest you come back for Christmas then.
Okay, I can do that.
Great stuff, Richard. Thanks a lot for enlightening us.
I've had a great time.
Me too. So I guess you don't have time for any post talk, so
No.
just run.
No, I really haven't. I've been spending almost 4 hours. You got me in almost 4 hours, my guy.
I know, and if I wasn't such a decent guy, I would try for 5. But you know what? Give my best to Robin.
I certainly.
And enjoy yourselves today.
Thank you. We'll talk soon.
Yeah, we will. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And thanks again to Mr. Hoagland for coming on and getting the forum treatment. I'm gonna read you some excerpts from Dark Mission, but first a few practical updates. We have lots of subscribers at our main YouTube channel, but only a fraction have discovered our other channel there, called Forum Borealis Shorts. Now, it's easy to find by going to our main channel's front page, and you'll see almost at the top posted all the uploads from that other channel there. We would appreciate if you'd bother to subscribe to that channel also. Don't think it's just stuff you already know from our main channel, because even if we indeed do post snips from the full shows there, there's exclusives too, like teaser previews from coming shows that we first put up on our Shorts channel. And also we will post bonus stuff from our website there when it's time to dump it to the public. And if you're a patron who signed up at our website, or just a listener who enjoys our shows, but in either case have not subscribed to our YouTube channels, please do so. I won't bore you by listing all the good reasons. Sufficient to say, the larger our channels become, the more YouTube will treat us properly and give us opportunities lacking today. Okay, I'll give you one example. We waste lots and lots of time by having to fight taking down other channels' re-uploads of our entire show. Sometimes channels pop up that contain all our programs and only our programs, and they even monetize them. Now, this detracts views from us, not to mention that it defunds us, so we have to try to get rid of it. Problem is, until we become large enough, we have to file one complaint, and the bureaucratic mill is terrible, and there's lots of correspondence involved, and so if we get more subscribers, we are eligible for automation, where we will be notified of matches and can tick a box for what should happen to it. And this alone will free lots of energy that we can spend on actually creating more content, which means more frequent programs for you to enjoy. So, you help us out practically by subscribing, and of course the biggest support, apart from donations, is spreading our shows and getting more listeners. If you like a show, just share it on your social media. That's the most effective way for organic growth. Now let's listen to a few quotes from Richard's fascinating book Dark Mission, The Secret History of NASA, that he co-authored with the former engineer and NASA contractor Mike Barra. Just who had been involved and how much did they know? What could make them stay silent for so long? How many people at NASA would have been in on it to pull off such an enormous coup? Right under the noses of the literally tens of thousands of honest, rank-and-file NASA scientists and engineers. And how were they recruited? Aldrin had at the time been a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason. There was now a direct linkage between Aldrin and the ceremonial act he had committed on the moon. It was a direct offering by a Freemason to the ancient Egyptian gods that his craft most revered. The timing of the ceremony, 33 minutes after landing, when Sirius was at 19.5 degree above the landing site, might have something to do with the tradition of the 33 degree in the Scottish Rite. In the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, the 33 degree is considered the highest level of enlightenment that a Freemason can achieve. Coupled with the tetrahedral 19.5 altitude of Sirius above Tranquility Base, this suggested that there was some significant connections between these quote-unquote holy numbers. Yet it was too easy to simply say that these Egyptian rituals were a conspiracy by the Freemasons inside NASA. Over the century, Freemasonry has been the target of derision, persecution, and suspicion that is not generally justified. However, there is a significant difference between the Masonic craft in general and the more specific institution of which Aldrin was a member, the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. It is not directly connected to the Grand Lodges of the craft. The vast majority of Freemasons throughout the world are members of the Grand Lodges only. If a Mason desires to continue his studies of the spiritual and ethical teachings of Freemasonry, he may elect to pursue degrees in one of several appendant bodies, of which the York Rite and Scottish Rite are the two most prominent. So, when someone talks about a 33-degree Freemason, they are actually talking about a member of the Scottish Rite appendant body. It, like the US Senate, is a very exclusive club. As Aldrin was a member of the Southern jurisdiction, which controlled all the Scottish Rite lodges in Washington, D.C., Houston, Florida, Alabama, and every other major city that held a significant NASA manned spaceflight facility, we focused exclusively on this organization. It quickly became obvious that the Scottish Rite could and did have a significant influence on the agency, including many of its contractors and employees. Hoagland discovered that Aldrin had also carried a Masonic apron with him to the moon, and a flag from the Supreme Council of the Southern jurisdiction. Upon returning, he had delivered both personally to the Sovereign Grand Commander, Southern Jurisdiction, at a temple in Washington, D.C., in a very solemn ceremony. The Grand Lodge of Texas also claimed that Aldrin had staked claim to the moon in the name of Freemasonry by a ritual he performed during one of the Apollo EVAs, and subsequently formed Tranquility Lodge 2000, which endeavored to eventually have its meetings on the moon itself. We quickly discovered that several more astronauts were Scottish Rite Freemasons, including some of the most famous. The obvious question then was just how many in the NASA hierarchy were Scottish Rite Freemason members under the Southern jurisdiction. As it turned out, just about everybody who was anybody at NASA had some ties to the craft. Not only that, but we soon discovered that the Freemasons were not the only quote-unquote secret society operating behind the scenes at NASA, nor were they alone in their dedication to the Egyptian legions of the great gods. The story of Werner von Braun, Kurt Debus, and the other German rocket scientists brought to the US after World War II may not be as strange, but it is, if anything, far more disturbing. To most Americans who grew up during the 1960s, Dr. Werner von Braun is a hero of the American space program, largely credited as the single most important figure in the moon rocket programs. Von Braun is rarely mentioned these days, and when he is usually portrayed as either a dedicated empirical scientist or a lovable buffoon. Von Braun was far more than just a German rocket scientist, or even a mere member of the Nazi Party, as some historians have freely admitted. Von Braun during World War II was nothing less than a major in the SS, the fearsome and fanatically loyal arm of the Nazi war machine, entrusted to carry out the most inhuman acts of the regime. Linda Hunt found survivors of the Nazi missile factories who told her that von Braun not only witnessed executions and abuse of prisoners at those facilities, but ordered executions. Recently, new documents also show that von Braun was commissioned to come up with a plan near the end of World War II to use one of his V-2 rockets to bomb New York City with a radioactive device, which would have immediately killed thousands, to say nothing of the untold later deaths from cancer. That such a man could spend his later years walking with presidents and giving speeches on the wonders of space explorations, rather than rotting in prison for crimes against humanity, is clear testament to the political expediencies of the Cold War. Von Braun, who was still a student, operated at a secret laboratory on the Baltic coast near Peenemünde, where his classified research doubled as his doctoral thesis. His design was successful and the German rocket program led the way. When Hitler came to power in 1933, von Braun remained in Germany, even though he could have left. Von Braun's team had the eyes of the Führer on them almost from the moment Hitler assumed power. Colonel Walter Dornberger was personally assigned by Hitler to oversee the research for military applications. In 1939, Adolf Hitler himself visited the young scientist's lab, where he was treated to an impressive demonstration of the capabilities of the rockets von Braun's team had been developing. The Führer came away impressed with the demonstration, but pressed von Braun to escalate his timetable for full-scale development. A few weeks after the meeting, von Braun received a letter offering a commission in the SS from Himmler personally. The canonical history is that he was pressured by the Third Reich and that he agonized over the decision, but this actually seems increasingly unlikely. Von Braun's aristocratic parents had many high-level connections even in Hitler's government, and many European aristocrats were members of secret societies, like the Masons. Joining the Nazi Party, even the SS, might not only have seemed like a good career move, but may have come naturally to a man who was taught his higher place in society was a birthright. In fact, it is now clear that von Braun was a close personal friend of German Reichsführer Heinrich Himmler, who offered him the SS degree and rank of major. It was also a secret society, designed specifically by Himmler to be a German counterpart to the Freemason influence in Europe. Influenced by various Aryan cults of the early 1900s, like the Thule Society, the SS created its own set of rituals and degrees modeled on the Masonic rites. The von Braun, along with other Nazi rocketry experts, was a voluntary member of this quasi-occult military organization. Is not at all far-fetched. For a man of von Braun's clear ambition, he might have seen his membership as not only desirable, but perhaps even a requirement, considering the secrecy involved in German rocket projects. If he could show Hitler and Himmler he could keep a secret, they would trust him that much more, with money and resources, like the slave labor needed in the secret factories. Von Braun was certainly considered a key member of the Reich's upper echelon. A testament to this is the fact that at his induction into the SS, Himmler himself was in attendance, and it was most certainly a rare occasion when the Reichsführer attended an SS induction ceremony. Von Braun perfected the world's first true ballistic missile in the early 1940s. Shortly thereafter, the weapon was being mass-produced at the Mittelwerk concentration camp. In compliance with Hitler's orders, the A-4 flying bomb was deployed against Britain in 1944. The London town of Chiswick was devastated by the bomb, and Joseph Goebbels renamed the A-4 the Vengeance Weapon 2, or V2. Von Braun knew well before the end that the war was lost. As the Allies neared the capture of the V2 rocket complex, von Braun engineered the surrender of 500 of his top rocket scientists, along with plans and test vehicles to the Americans. Von Braun and his compatriots were brought to America under Project Paperclip, despite some objections by investigators in the Gioia. The simple fact that von Braun, Arthur Rudolph, Kurt Debus, Humbertus Strugholt, and many other German scientists with elaborate Nazi pasts were brought to the US at all is a testament to Cold War convenience. President Truman's executive order authorizing the program was very specific. No ardent Nazis or war criminals would be allowed into the US under Paperclip. Clearly, as a major in the SS, von Braun met the minimum criteria of ardent Nazi. Fortunately for von Braun, he had friends in high places, not just in Germany but in the US, in the personages of Drs. Vannevar Bush and von Karman. Their influence was so powerful that doubts expressed by the field investigators were ultimately conveniently overlooked. In its evaluation of von Braun, written on June 25, 1947, coincidentally the same date as the founding of modern Freemasonry in 1717, and one possible date given for the infamous UFO crash at Roswell, New Mexico, the Gioia basically punts in its evaluation of him, clearing the way for him to emigrate to America. Von Braun immediately showed his expertise and abilities as an organizer and was eventually rewarded by being appointed technical director of the U.S. Army Ballistic Weapons Program. Von Braun and his cohorts were so certain of their value that they made no attempt to conceal either the Nazi past or apparently the love for the Third Reich. Having beaten the system through Paperclip, they evidently didn't care who knew of their ardent Nazi histories. Most, if not all, had elaborate Nazi records and were still heavily committed to the party's ideologies, and apparently even openly practiced its sacraments. The group freely displayed swastikas and other Nazi symbols on their clothes and on signs in the camps where they were kept after their immigration to the US. During this same period, von Braun used various avenues to sell Americans on the idea of space travel. He wrote several articles in the popular quarterly magazines, and the success of these articles attracted the notice of 33-degree Scottish Rite Freemason Walt Disney. Disney hired von Braun to produce and star in 3 popular television films about space travel in the future. These programs helped establish von Braun as America's most notable space expert. These programs also had their curious share of thinly veiled occult and Masonic symbolism. In Mars and Beyond, for instance, the traveling astronauts discover evidence of an ancient, abandoned civilization on Mars. But that pales in comparison to the first program, Man in Space. In this seminal space propaganda film, von Braun discusses how a manned reconnaissance of the moon might be handled in the near future. In the dramatization, von Braun's rocket takes 5 days to get to the moon, with a chance for one pass around the quote-unquote dark side. The film does a remarkable job of accurately depicting the moon's surface, until a dramatic event takes place. As the ship is flying along in its single orbit, a crewman suddenly announces that he has a high radiation reading at 33 degrees. A radar operator then announces that he has an unusual formation coming up in front of them, and a flare is launched immediately. When it detonates, the blast of light reveals the unmistakably geometric outline of an installation on the cratered surface far beneath them on the far side of the moon. There is no question that this formation is completely different than anything we have seen in any of the other recreated views of the moon in the film, and no question that the formation is also definitely artificial. So what is the reaction to this sight by the astronauts on board? Absolutely nothing. Not a word is spoken about it in the dramatization, nor at any point later in the film. Von Braun simply inserted it without comment. One possible implication of this is that the astronauts were required to keep quiet about what they saw. Von Braun and Disney obviously intended to portray the moon as previously inhabited and simultaneously pay homage to the Masonic 33 degree. In 1955, von Braun became a US citizen. When Vanguard ignominiously blew up on the launch pad with the whole world watching, von Braun's team was then suddenly frantically recruited to save the day and get the US some kind of win in their onrushing space race. Shortly after the mission's historic success, NASA was formally established, and von Braun had finally stamped the ticket he'd been looking to cash in on for decades. Von Braun was appointed director of the new Marshall Space Flight Center in July 1960 and given the task of developing the rockets for the new agency. Glennon moved quickly to establish the agency's monopoly over space exploration. One of NASA's first acts was to commission the Brookings Report, which makes crystal clear the discovery of extraterrestrial artifacts fall under the dark blanket of national security. When John F. Kennedy took office in 1961, he moved swiftly to replace Glennon and restructure NASA to accomplish one of the major goals of his presidency, placing a man on the moon by 1970. To this end, Kennedy, on the specific recommendation of Vice President Johnson, appointed James E. Webb as the new administrator. It is on the Webb, another 33-degree Scottish Rite Freemason, that the true influence of the various secret societies within the new agency came into its own. Within a few months, Webb had appointed Kenneth Kleinknecht as director of Project Mercury. Kenny had already been selected in 1959 as one of the 2 single points of contact between NASA and the DoD. In this dual role, he was able to monitor information that traveled back and forth between Project Mercury and the Pentagon. With a lengthy history as an engineer in a variety of black military programs in the 1950s, he was ideally suited for this job. If there was a plan for the Masons to place their men at the highest levels of the space program, it could not have been more successful. Von Braun and the German rocket team also made their moves. von Braun placed many of his old Nazi cohorts into key positions in the new space agency. At von Braun's behest, Kurt Diebus was made the first director of the Kennedy Space Center. Diebus was also a Nazi Party member, and he organized the Space Center at Cape Canaveral along the lines of the German rocket programs of Mittelwerk and Peenemünde, minus the slave labor, of course. Once these organizations were in place, the task of selecting the astronauts for the manned program began. Here again, a clear preference for Freemasons was expressed. There could of course be perfectly mundane reasons why so many of the astronauts were Masons. Many aspects of the lunar programs were secret, and the potential candidates may have seen membership in the order as a means of demonstrating their ability to keep a secret. They may also have simply noticed that with Webb in charge of the agency, they might have a better chance of being selected if they joined his order. Becoming a member of a civic or fraternal organization, certainly in the US, has long been a well-trod path to connections for enterprising individuals and thus greater business or career success. Once they had established themselves in all the key positions throughout the new space agency, von Braun, Webb, von Karman, Elbaz, and all the rest of them were able to proceed with plans they had been incubating quietly for many years pre-NASA. With Brookings as a specifically designed political excuse for keeping key future NASA discovery secrets, the elite leadership of this clandestine occult hierarchy were able to set in motion an inner program, carefully hidden from the general public and the honest side of NASA, which appears to have been no less than a massive technological effort to confirm their shared religious visions of a literal duat on the surface of the moon and beyond, to which they and they alone deserved sole access. In other words, if we are right, these elitists literally stole the entire space program for themselves from the rest of all mankind. While on the surface the Freemasons and the Nazis would appear to have little in common in pursuit of such an astonishing, arrogant, elitist vision, in fact the exact opposite is true. As we have established, Freemasons holds the most ancient gods of Egypt and their complicated, incestuous relationships as being the cornerstone of a cosmology older than civilization itself, of which they see themselves as now playing out major crucial roles. The same is true for the SS. The early Aryan cult from which Hitler's Nazi party sprang traced their lineage back to the Teutonic Knights, a Germanic offshoot of the Knights Templar. Their ascendancy merges with the Templars and traces back again to ancient Egypt. Hitler and Himmler believed that these Egyptian gods themselves came from Atlantis, which they believed was a high civilization established on Earth by extraterrestrials. In this view, the ancient and uninterrupted bloodline from Horus to the present was the ultimate source of the natural supremacy of the Aryan race itself. It was this divine right of descent which gave the modern Nazis, in their view, their prerogative to rule all other men on planet Earth. So if all of these secret societies had at their core a deep obsession with the gods of ancient Egypt, it was entirely plausible that all of them might have had the motivation to manipulate Apollo 11 landing in the ways we have described. Given the documented deployment of key members of each of these groups in strategic position throughout the agency, they certainly had the means. Another ritual coincidence, a second NASA mission deliberately landed on the day of Hitler's birth. By commemorating the infamous leader of the Third Reich, the key players were now overwhelmingly identified as none other than the NASA members of the former Reich. NASA at the highest levels had effectively been taken over from the Masons. Further, it was now clear that the Nazis had carefully set up the precedent in 1961, the real objectives of Apollo, including a return to Earth of artifacts from the ancient ruins that the Nazis knew about and clearly viewed as being left by their own ancestors. No wonder Kennedy was murdered. Immediately after his repeated offer to share this priceless quote-unquote Nazi heritage with their worst enemies, the Russians, was finally accepted. This is just a fraction of what you can read about in his book. This is from the part that concerns the power battle behind the scenes. Thus far today, but we've already got other shows stacked up for this series, so stay tuned. Your host has been your pal signing off with sincere regards. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?